Our final presenter for the conference today is Clark Stone, or as we know him, CJ. He was president of the Society for Descriptive Psychology in 2012. In today's presentation, CJ confronts a challenge that many researchers face when it's difficult to identify who should or should not be included in a topic or group they wish to study. The group for CJ's focus in today's presentation is, who is a pagan? This is a highly debated issue, both in public scholarly discourse about paganism and within the contemporary pagan movement. This presentation critically examines the use of any definition to answer this question. He presents an important methodology used in descriptive psychology, parametric analysis. He will show that this conceptual notational device can provide an answer. After creating a parametric analysis of contemporary paganism, he will compare and test its conceptual structure against common pagan concepts and formulations. He'll show that his parametric analysis offers additional applications and research possibilities through further refinement and expansion. CJ has talked to and worked with, and as he says, interviewed contemporary pagans of all stripes during the 20 years that he ran the School of Sacred Paths, an adult alternative religion educational institution. So please welcome CJ Stone presenting Contemporary Paganism, a Parametric Analysis. Thank you.
The front nine on this is something that you probably all know, so I'm gonna blow through it. The back nine, we can slow down a little, maybe you can ask questions. Contemporary paganism, whatever its sources or claims, is a fast-growing religious movement in the United States. According to the ERIS 2001 study, the population of self-identified Wiccans alone went from 8,000 in 1990 to 134,000 in 2001, a 1,675% increase. As the contemporary pagan population rises, there is more call among them for some kind of public structure that lends them credence with other religions and to protect them from various kinds of attacks. Whether this means an edifice or a regularly scheduled supplication breakfast, contemporary pagans are looking for a way to answer the question, who are we? This presentation will use a parametric analysis conceptual notational device to answer this question. Identifying contemporary pagans has a spotty history. Part of the trouble has been the definition promulgated by the Christian overculture. One who is not a Christian, Muslim, or Jew, one who has no religion, which would seem to include atheists, it doesn't make much sense to me, and finally, a non-Christian. That overly broad definition would fit Buddhists who are obviously not contemporary pagans. More recent attempts by others have been less than satisfactory. Asking pagans is no good. It's an old saw among contemporary pagans that if you put two pagans in a room and ask a question, you'll get three answers. As far as that goes, who is a pagan is a good conversation starter among contemporary pagans themselves. But the problem of identification is not likely to abate over time. More people with diverse views are claiming to be pagan, and there is no central authority to prevent any particular group from splintering or from starting something de novo and calling themselves pagan. The question is also central for determining who should have access to a community's limited resources and who should not. Now, if you think this sounds like a non-problem, I give you Vermin Supreme. He is pictured here in his normal state, using a boot for a hat. Mr. Supreme is a perennial candidate for president, and he claims to be a pagan, while he is a satirical candidate who uses many tools to critique the current political situation and election system. and such as a giant toothbrush pictured here in the year that mandatory toothbrushing was part of his platform. Reporters took his pagan claim quite seriously, as did local pagans in Minnesota, which is where Vermin Supreme is from. Local pagans were put on their back foot and had to say, Mr. Supreme is not known to them as a pagan, and certainly did not speak for all pagans, because no one speaks for all pagans. That no central authority thing I was talking about before. Perhaps the problem is not with paganism and the diversity, but with the concept of definition. Definitions have two requirements. The first, definitions must apply across all instances. Therefore, a definition will list what is universally uniform in cases. Second, and rather differently than we have been taught, it is ultimately an appeal to the competence and judgment of the user. That is, if you look up the definition of numinous, you find over relating to Newman, and your competence with the word Newman is being challenged. You must essentially follow down the chain of definitions until each word is inside your competence. Unfortunately, a word in the chain often refers to an earlier word in the chain, and then you're stuck. In a classic instance, comedian David Brenner reports looking up them after hearing the phrase "him and bigger," only to discover the meaning of them was bigger. The appeal to competence and judgment is present in definitions in all fields. Hold on, I'm lost here. And does that sound silly? Yes, yes, it does. We essentially are asking people to know what they're talking about. But maybe we shouldn't make it harder than it needs to be. We require a device that depends on the competence and judgment of the user, but still provides a complete solution space for the subject at hand. Fortunately, devices of this type have been cataloged by Astorio under the heading conceptual-notational devices. In his work, acting on concept X means acting on a distinction between X and not X, whatever X may be. For example, to take a drink of coffee, I must have the concept of coffee and be able to tell coffee apart from whatever is not coffee. If I couldn't do this, I might drink tea or gasoline instead of coffee, not know, believe I had succeeded, erroneously expect coffee-related results, and so forth. Thus, a conceptual notational device is a way of noting what distinctions persons use to act on something being one kind rather than another. Thus, let's see, yes, I did that, yep. The concept used to identify something may identify a concept too. For example, if we talk about a concept car, you must specify the concept wheels, because people use wheels to tell if something is a car. 3 is the minimum number of wheels for a car. 2 wheels is a motorcycle. 1 wheel is whatever this is. But we do not need to state how many wheels above 3, unless notable. The odd wheel was for old weird Harold. He had a Continental. You may remember the Continental used to have that 5th wheel in the back. Type of wheel is not conceptually necessary because wheels can be tires but do not need to be. Could be a wagon type wheel. But if it were necessary, wheels could also be subjected to this kind of concept cataloging. Further car concepts let us distinguish a railroad car from an ore car, from a toy car, and so on. Again, the central concept is what distinctions are necessary. Astorio has identified parametric analysis as the process of cataloging how 2 instances of the same thing are similar and different. This process can be cumulative, so further instances can be compared to the catalog, and the parameters of the catalog can be checked and expanded. Ultimately, there should be a point at which any instance of the concept being cataloged is covered by the various possible and conditional choices of the parameters. I announce that as a pragmatic truth rather than a logical truth. There is a point is talking as if the catalog is complete, and then finding a way to incorporate something if it flies in from the dark side of the moon. The parametric analysis depends on the competence and judgment of the user. Thus, it's important to remember a PA is normative rather than definitive. It looks for what a competent user of the concept at hand would normally say about an instance of the concept, what distinctions a user with good judgment would usually make about the distinctions being made. For the human sciences, this is an advantage. The PA process naturally tends to reflect the concepts and values of community members and generally prevents observer projection. After all, if the observer tries to insert a set of concepts the community does not use, they will never allow them, except perhaps to spoof annoying observers. Oops. Uh-oh, I died.
Try it again now.
One more time. There we go, thank you. In that sense, I have constructed a PA of contemporary paganism centering on a series of discussions held as part of the Mentoring Elders program at the Even Star School of Sacred Paths in St. Paul, Minnesota. The School of Sacred Paths is squarely situated in Paganistan, a uniquely innovative, eclectic and feisty neo-pagan community of the Twin Cities, and one that is patient with innovations, creative with reconstructions, and are very careful to keep a sense of humor about themselves. This innovation, creativity, reconstruction, and eclecticism is well represented by the members of the MEP who describe themselves as seen here. They essentially form a core group who are exemplary of what it is to be a contemporary pagan, while also being exemplary of the problem of defining what it is to be a contemporary pagan. So I'm gonna let you look at that for a little bit. And if you want, we can come back and you can ask questions about what this stuff might mean.
Scared away.
Thus, discussion centered on differences and similarities among the members as pagans and of absent pagans who were well known to the members. The result of the discussions of parametric analysis of what is necessary and normative among contemporary pagans is shown both next. So we can sit on that for a second. And here I've made bold the parameters themselves. The complex parameters are bold, italic, and expanded below. I made the subparameters italic to spot them easily. Now I'm going to go on to a little explanation of each parameter. Structurally, several of the parameters could be described as values of a more complex overparameter, but for this discussion, I am only concerned with particular values of the overparameters because they are mandatory in paganism. An explication of such overparameters better suited to a parametric analysis of religion in general, which this presentation is not. I am pointing out the parameters and values pagans use to grant each other the status pagan. Thus, to maintain focus on paganism, I have not brought out paganism's place in the possible facts about religion. For example, pantheism itself could be the name of a parameter in a religion PA, and its values could be yes, no, other. From the religion PA, the yes value would be mandatory for pagans, and other could co-occur provided it did not overrule the yes value. In this presentation, I've taken this kind of structure to be a factual digression. So, because the PA is normative and not definitive, the primary tools for arriving at these parameters and their values are the three questions that you see here. These questions are essentially the same question, but phrasing is sometimes important to get at the distinctions competent users are acting on. There are obviously many variations in common speech for any question, and natural mastery of question generation was not suppressed in favor of survey uniformity. So let's make a comparison. The story will like to use a chess player to bring out our understanding of membership. And maybe P says, I never read chess books. Okay, some people don't get very much out of chess books. I don't study famous games. I don't do chess problems. P says, I'm a chess player, but I never X. What could X be and not violate P's claims of membership? A lot of things. Of course, the one thing a chess player must do is play chess. Paganism is a little more complicated than that, but the principle is the same. So now the parameters. Contact with participating spirits. Naming the parameter participating spirits may seem overly general, but it reflects what is conceptually necessary. This arose out of discussions in which one of the pagans was essentially an atheist without a God belief, because he is very much a small d Democrat and would not give any spirit the rank of God. Rather than name the parameter gods and include an atheist subvalue with a participating spirit sub-subvalue, it became clear that participating spirits was the necessary parameter and gods was a subvalue chosen by users, but not all users. Individuals may make distinctions between spirits, gods, fairies, power animals, etc., but those distinctions are individual and not necessary. Participating spirits can be persons in the way that Osorio means it, but if so, are praetor human. This is a new word created for this PA, and it means outside the ordinary course of what is normally human, differing from surpassing what is normally human. Praetor humans are part of nature, but their status includes things that humans' status cannot. Gods can be seen as praetor humans with expanded status who have also been assigned high rank. Immanence. There's nothing particularly noteworthy about this parameter, except pagans aren't in the habit of dealing with spirits who aren't willing to show themselves in the here and now. One of the contacts for this presentation has in his home what he calls a dybbuk. It's a house spirit similar to a brownie. He does things for it, and it does things for him. It's present and active, unlike some gods who prefer to remain nameless. There's nothing.
Good joke.
Thanks, I knew you'd get it.
Wait a second.
Pantheistic. The definition of pantheism has been restricted to reflect what is conceptually necessary. The OED defines pantheism as worship or tolerance of all or many gods. But pagans do not necessarily worship all or tolerate many, both of which are possibilities in that definition. Pagans do necessarily tolerate, and their tolerate must include all participating spirits. So not every god that exists, but ones that seem to be participating with people, those are the ones they tolerate. Register of experience. This is adapted from York. There's nothing erroneous about his original formulation, the domain red, etc. But many people found it difficult to understand. And one of my adaptations says what he meant. What's important here is nature and self are mandatory. No pagan would ever say, I never check my experience against nature. Or I never use my own experience when thinking about being a pagan, compared to a Taoist who says, I never think about water when I think about the Tao. Practice. Now, the notable parameters here are BI, undiscovered proper practice is not yet found. This lets a pagan relate to other pagans the way the Essenes relate to mainline Judaism. That is, we are somehow not achieving what we want, so we should investigate that. And while we are investigating, we will not do the suspect practices. Note that this choice would normatively be treated as a claim about the value of 4B ROES. That is the self-mandatory under register of experience. And be accompanied by community monitoring for actual ongoing investigation. You know, the next time you see this person, you say, so how's it going? Trying to figure out what we ought to be doing. And if they were like, I was busy watching the Jets game, that's not a good answer. There are some pagans who consider their family life their practice, and they don't distinguish a ritual that they do where they get together and make the right motions. There's obviously not much contact with these pagans as they don't show up for public rituals or other group activities, but they do exist and they must be accounted for. Psychic phenomena. Although psychic phenomena largely could have been explained under combinations of other parameters, The heathen position of no comment, not lionized, demonized, or ignored, required a separate parameter. Heathens were very squarely contemporary pagans, so they must be accounted for. This set of parameters seems unusually compact for something supposed to cover a phenomenon as broad as contemporary paganism. If we compare to another well-known successful parametric analysis, we might see that compactness is not a particular measure of error. The PA I have in mind is the standard mathematical treatment of a waveform. Now, this can be represented as, oops, here we go again. And substituting values for each variable, the parameters, can control all aspect of a wave, a description of a wave, length, frequency, amplitude, displacement, order, and so forth. This has been well known and well used for about 200 years. It's the backbone of our successful telecommunications. Thus, there is no necessary relation between compactness and error. Does it cover the subject? Let's refer to a number of questions and requirements in contemporary paganism and see if they are present by any manipulation of the values. So now we can slow down a little bit if you guys have questions about the material. Magic. Without getting into what magic might be, pagans admit the possibility of magic. It's spelled here with a CK to separate it from the kind of thing that magicians do on stage, like Penn and Teller. This is not the ritualized practice of magic, like with the Rosy Cross or maybe the Freemasons, which is under the practice parameter, but the occurrence of what other religions might call miracles. These results would be of two kinds: physical phenomena in nature that we do not understand, and spiritual action. The first is hardly excluded by the PA. The former is hardly excluded by the PA, and the latter is allowed under the participating spirits parameter. Cyclical time frame. This can be derived from the nature value of a register of experience parameter, because nature is cyclical, but perhaps we are taking the wrong perspective on the question. Simple timekeeping requires cycles. So this is a question of values, rank of motivations, status concepts. Values are user dependent, but note that high rank for this concept is supported by other concepts in the domain, particularly ROE self. Personal responsibility. There is an emphasis in contemporary paganism on taking responsibility for your own spiritual development. This can be as simple as exploring which participating spirits are most amicable and facile. It can be as complicated as pushing past theodicy to explain anomic phenomena. The span of activity is represented under the self value of the ROE parameter. For comparison, the inverse would be, I am a pagan, but I never pay any attention to my own experience. If I see spirits or cones of power or anything like that, I just ignore them. And I just accept what other pagans tell me about the world. Anyone who said that would be discredited as a pagan immediately. For comparison, a Roman Catholic who said, I do what the Pope tells me to do and I don't look back, would not be impeached as a Roman Catholic. Idolatry. Covered under the participating spirits immanence and ROE self, possible but not mandatory, because recognizing a spirit of object is a user-dependent value. Local emphasis. Covered under participating spirits as a spirit of place, and immanence, possible but not mandatory, because recognizing a spirit of place is a user-dependent value. Are Satanists pagans? This question primarily refers to LaVey Satanists. Satanists are pagans only if they can meet the community-affirming implications of the P parameter, the pantheistic parameter. They also appear to emphasize the ROE self parameter to the exclusion of almost all other parameters. Finally, the reductionist nature of human beings as merely animals voids the PS parameter, violates the person concept, which would void the PS parameter. Humans could not be participating with the spirits Sorry, I got lost for a second. Humans could not be participating with spirits because they're merely animals, and animals can't consent or participate in the way that we would normally understand the concept of participating. Just as a sidebar, here's a list of contemporary Satanists. The Satanic Temple, which is actually atheistic, has done a lot in the last couple of years when Christians are trying to violate the separation of church and state. The Satanic Temple steps up, and that usually puts the kibosh on whatever it is that these Christians want to do. The other one is Temple of Set. They're not really Satanists. They say Satan was Set, the Egyptian god, so they're really Egyptian theists, not anti-Christian theists. So there are a few of them out there. What about creeds? Contemporary paganism is considered a living practice, that is, nature and self are changing. And so there is no final solution to human organization. Thus, there can't be a final creed by which all pagans could swear and be accepted, either as a group or as individuals. In that sense, performatives are discounted by contemporary pagans. Generally, by comparison, Covenant of Goddess was clearly moving to exclude creed-swearing saboteurs by requiring any person joining COG to state, "I am a witch." So when I was joining COG, the president said to me, "You must say you are a witch." And I said, "I say I am a witch." She said, "You know what I mean." And I did know what she meant. Psychic phenomena. For whatever reason, contemporary pagans try to account for ESP and similar phenomena among humans. Most consider them to be just another ability, like perfect pitch or being ambidextrous. Others see them as gifts or as a state that can be achieved. And note that state here is a systematic variation in powers or dispositions, and contemporary pagans largely concern themselves with the variation of abilities and knowledge category of powers. Whether their beliefs about the sources of such matters, whatever their beliefs about the sources of such matters, they do undertake to train themselves and consider it wasteful not to use the abilities. So they're denying the ROE self-parameters. Notable exception are heathens who have no positive, negative, or neutral culture about the matter, and so make no commitments about such phenomena. Moving to the PA itself and its uses, interviewing prospects and accrediting outsiders. In Paganistan, an important aspect of the culture is accepting beginners and accrediting pagans not from around here. The PA could be turned into a set of questions to determine which values a person holds for each parameter. For training beginners, this could show which pagan group is most like their existing conceptual structure, and it could show where they are conceptually weak and should study. For both groups, it could point out which style of talk would be the most fruitful. Ideally, it could exclude imposters. Classification of pagan communities. This PA was designed to reflect the possible facts about paganism, not any particular community or subgroup inside those possible facts. However, there is nothing to prevent classification of the individual communities of paganism via this PA. Much could be learned from a stratified sampling approach. The possibility of apparently dissimilar communities finding common ground is exciting. Shifts in paganism. Given that this PA will stand all tests today, and given that paganism is a changing religion, revising this PA over time will note change vectors in paganism. That is, it can be used to determine which ways paganism is changing and at what rate. This could be done for paganism as a whole via a highly diverse survey of the type that created this PA, or it could be done community by community. Values clarification. The PA could be used to create an instrument that measured the relative priority among the values of the parameters. For instance, it has been quite clear in discussions that the pantheism value has an insistent priority among pagans. This is often expressed as pagans are tolerant, and this is often expressed early in discussions of what makes pagans different from other religions. Communities could be described by such rankings, and such descriptions could be compared over time to determine value change vectors. Summary, paganism is not well defined. This is not because we are lacking some part of paganism, but because definition itself is lacking as a conceptual notational device. Parametric analysis is a C&D better suited to explicating conceptual structures that are immune to definition. In this presentation, a PA was used to draw out the conceptual structure used by pagans to identify themselves. A broad group of pagans was consulted to create the PA, and this diverse group was satisfied it could identify pagans of all stripes. However, it should not be considered the final word about the paganism solution space, because it is based on the competence and judgment of pagans, which is normative, and norms change. It does function now, and it can be checked and rechecked over time to determine if paganism is changing and in which directions. Researchers may also find it useful in classifying various pagans and pagan communities. Thank you.
Thank you, CJ. We have about 25 minutes for discussion.
Joe,
How do the pagans that you know, if you've shown them this, how do they respond? Do they say, oh yeah, that nails it? Or is it,
no, they were very happy to have it.
oh, great,
They were like, yes, this is about us. I see myself in that. I see other people I know in there.
that's great,
It works,
that's true, it's your error check.
right?
Behind you?
Questions over here?
Just briefly, I have an old friend who always describes himself as an atheist. So whenever he talks about nature, and he's a biologist, he waxes poetic. And one time he was talking about an old oak tree, which a wind had knocked over. And he said he just screamed in pain that, that this oak tree had meant so much to him over his whole life. Finally, I just said, Alan, you are not an atheist. You are an animist. And he said, guilty as charged.
Carol.
Yeah, I'm curious about how pagans feel about the term pagan. To me, it's a Christian way of saying you guys who don't get it and are wrong aren't one of us and you're bad.
Right. And so Pagan's response to you don't get it and you're wrong is this.
But is there a term they would rather use?
No, this is the term that they prefer to use.
Okay, and why?
In part because at the beginning they were set against Christians who said things like that. And so it's kind of like, if you say to a kid, you're a horrible kid, and fine, I'm a horrible kid now. It's like that. You want to call me a pagan?
Okay.
God damn it, I'm a pagan. That's right.
Yeah.
TJ, historically, with respect to years, when was it that pagans began to declare themselves as pagans? I was raised in Catholicism, so pagans were again those who did not see the truth, and it was a pejorative term. When did they claim that identification?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because there's sort of a synthetic history of paganism, starting from what many pagans call the burning times, when the dominant overculture was just killing people that they saw as pagan. And so there's sort of a history in there where paganism is surviving. But in the 20th century, several people who were prominent or visible or whatever did some things that kind of coalesced a modern pagan kind of thing. The people I'm talking with are considered North American neo-pagans, but I just stuck with contemporary pagans for this. You have some inside that group, you have some people like Alex Sanders, who says that when he was, under the age of 10, I can't remember how old, his grandmother rammed him into the kitchen and initiated him into the family witchcraft that had been 500 years in the making. And so, you know, when did it start? When his first book was published, I don't know. So,
Okay, thank you.
it's a very broad topic. You can read a lot on it, believe me.
Yeah, what clarifies for me that it was 20th century, not 18th.
Yeah, what we think about as neo-paganism was started in the 20th century, although many times they look at their roots. They do see some roots in the 18th century. I mean, yes, the 19th century. Anyone, Bueller?
I would just say, on the general subject of definitions, versus, the problems you have. I appreciate your using this example. It certainly was valuable for me in the, dealing with human.
Thank you.
Joe.
So to help me get a grounding in this, how would this analysis reveal, I guess if that's the right word, that, I can't remember his name, the guy with the boot on his head
Yes,
is not a pagan? Which values does he not satisfy, which parameters?
well, you'd have to interview him
But you-
specifically on that.
Oh, okay.
But again,
Can you say anything about how he appears to not satisfy the parameters as an observer?
the way it looks to me is that he's trying to kick up some dust.
Okay.
And so he is saying things that will get people riled up. You know, he's wearing a boot on his head, whatever else he does. Or whatever he says in his presidential campaign, okay, I'm gonna announce I'm a pagan, because that's gonna go against Christians, and especially the Christianist nationalist movement and so on. I'm a pagan, he says.
But I think you're saying it doesn't actually fit the parameter, the values don't fit the parameters.
No one knows him.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
he hasn't had any
I see.
contact with the pagan community that I'm aware of.
I
And
see.
no one has gone out to say to him, do you think that spirits of place or
Yeah, yeah.
like that?
Okay.
They're just like, we don't know him. He might be a pagan, but we don't know him.
I got you.
So he can't speak for us because nobody speaks for us.
Is there a concept of being one of us?
Well, just in the sense that, if you like Coca-Cola and you saw somebody else drinking a Coca-Cola, you might think that person's like me. So in that sense, there's a one of us, but pagans can be highly diverse, so they can be at the opposite ends of stuff. And this would be a tool for people who are apparently at loggerheads to say, oh, I see that we are not as conflicted as it appears that we are. And they were looking, I mean, the MEP was saying, this is good for that, so.
TJ, is there such a thing as a pagan, one who legitimately claims that status, saying of another person, he's a pagan, but he doesn't realize that he is?
Sure. I mean, you can you can credit somebody with a status, they can accept or reject the status, it's their business. But yeah, you could say, in the same way that Greg was saying, you're not an atheist, you're an animist, the same kind of thing.
Okay. Oh, I consider myself eligible then for somebody characterizing me that way.
I consider myself one.
Potentially eligible for the characterization, anyway.
Well, I'll send you the parametric analysis and you can check off all the boxes.
Nancy.
Congratulations, Walter. I'm wondering, are there communities within, like, how do you find communities of pagans?
Well, in my case, my wife ran a New Age metaphysical occult bookstore, which was a de facto community center for 40 years. So people would come there, you meet people there, things like that. Sometimes the meetings are dramatic, and I don't mean like this. There's a very prominent pagan in the Twin Cities who came into her bookstore for the first time. And when she saw him, she said, "Oh my God, we were on follows together." Well, that would be a very important thing for a pagan.
What was that? What was doing?
On follows. The Temple of Apollo where Socrates went to, find out who he was and what his fate was. So, that kind of dramatic thing is the kind of thing that can happen. Someone that I know just went to a restaurant and she was eating and she heard these people over here saying this, that, and the other thing about paganism. And so when she was done, she got over and introduced herself. The rest is history. We're in a school. People come to a class about something, then they see each other and say, here we are, we're a community now, in this room, and they get to know each other and that sort of thing. So it happens in one of the ways that it can happen.
Online, CJP.
Hey, it's great to see you, CJ, up there.
But
So, here's something, like you said at the beginning, a good definition maps the uniformities, what all of the instances have. And it maps the acceptable differences, like the different parameters and all the different values. In this case, it seems like the differences are much greater than the uniformities. And I'm wondering if that's different than most other parametric analyses you've seen of other things. And can you comment on that, the balance of uniformities and differences here that you encountered?
Well, my feeling in talking to the pagans who looked at this was that they were recognizing the similarities in what appeared to be a difference. And so you have a lot of people who are, they have one psychic practice or another. They read tarot cards, they use crystals, they have a spirit that they talk to or whatever it is, that these people could recognize themselves as similar, even though they appeared in practice to be highly diverse. And so the whole thing was like that, where they said, oh yes, I see myself in that. And now I also see Bob in that, and I also see Jane in that, and so on and so forth. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like there's just a great many variations on the same thing. The
Yes.
few things that people recognize.
Right.
I see Win online.
You're muted, Win.
Win, I think you're muted.
Being muted seems to be a change of pace, as some of you recognize. CJ, good to see you. I wish we were hanging out. I was hoping to be down there, up there.
Speak up.
Here's what CJ Peak just said. It sounds like what you're describing is a kind of, a beautiful way to unfold family resemblances. And there's a way in which you kind of recognize somebody as in the family as, a central obvious figure, and other people a little further out. But there's a kind of, not a definition, but you know who feel in some fashion kindred. And it has that kind of quality, I think, of the Wittgensteinian notion of a family resemblance, that it, you feel
That's a
some.
good way to think of it. That's how they think of themselves, as being alike in a certain way.
Are you aware of Bill Plotkin's soul work? Bill Plotkin's soul work.
I don't think so.
It's read it.
Okay.
Or go on one of his quests.
Anyone? Thank you very much.
Given us a lot to think about.